Hi, everybody. It's time for me to give you another update. So let me start sharing my screen with you here. Everything is sort of moving in the right direction. Hopefully you've all heard that on the news. Still some interesting data points to share and things to look for. So overall, all the curves are moving in the right direction, nicely decreasing, except mortality still rising in California, although decreasing in the US, just because of that usual lag of that data point. So to think about variants, we are now getting a breakdown between the BA.2 and the initial Omicron variant. So we can actually see that the BA.2 only makes up about 3.9% of all Omicron and all COVID cases in the US. So a pretty small share overall in the US. And you can see this here by geographic region. The dark purple is the BA.1 variant and the light pink is the BA.2. Interestingly, when you look at the variant broken down by nations, you can see that really Denmark and the United Kingdom have the lion's share of the BA.2 variant. In the US, which you can see is down here in the brown, really has not taken off very much here overall. Interestingly, however, when you look at all US states and territories, all of them have seemed to come down and decrease nicely off of this latest surge, except for Guam, which seems to still stay sort of stable and hovering at a higher level. And recently, they sent a small sample to be genetically sequenced and tested, and they actually have a majority of BA.2 variant. So interesting that this would cause this difference within this territory, and something certainly for us to continue watching. When we look here at Santa Clara County, on this particular website, and the health department, they are not breaking it down for us to see how many are each variant, but we do have that information for here at Stanford, and so we'll continue to monitor that for our own community. Interestingly, there is a recent article that just came out looking at Omicron targeted vaccines in early testing, meaning animal models. And they really didn't do any better than the original vaccines in protecting against infection or severe disease. And interestingly, because these are already, sort of behind the 8 ball, we're already coming down of our Omicron surge. And when we think about vaccine development, if we continue to just focus on one particular variant at a time, we are always going to be behind the curve. And so knowing that A, it wasn't really any more effective than the original, and B, we probably will not find these useful for each individual variant, we'll start thinking about other types of vaccines that may be more effective. And I'll finish out my presentation looking at that. When you look overall at vaccine, what's going on right now, you can see we're in that same sort of state compared to all these other countries. But what's interesting about this slide is that they have changed on the website the name of this. Instead of the share of people who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, there's the share of people who have completed the initial COVID-19 vaccination protocol. And so that sort of indicates that the initial 2 doses, or in some cases 1, that sort of delineates a complete vaccination protocol or complete vaccination in some countries is no longer considered enough in others. And you can see that Australia is just the latest country, in addition to Israel and France and other European nations, to actually state that 3 doses of the vaccine are really what you need to be considered fully vaccinated. Here in the US, we certainly have not gone to that yet. And so you can see when we say fully vaccinated, we still mean just 2 doses, or having 68.6% of the population over age 5 having had that, and 88.6% over age 65. But when you look at the number of people who have gotten their booster who are eligible, we're still doing quite poorly in that regard, only 43%. When you look overall at vaccination rate, we're really kind of languishing, we're stagnating, we're going down to almost the lower levels that we have ever been. When you look at overall which states are doing well, Alabama is still a holdout, but other states have done some significant increasing in vaccination rate over the last 2 weeks. And overall, the entire country is slowly becoming more vaccinated. In California, we're a little bit stagnating as well there. And you can see that in Santa Clara and San Mateo County, how many doses we've given per county of residents. And just as usual, California is doing well overall vaccination compared to the rest of the US. But unfortunately, in our elderly population, we continue to not do as well as the rest of the country. When you look at Santa Clara, we're doing quite excellently, 93.6%, and even our booster doses, 67.1% of the population eligible has received a booster, so that looks great. And especially in our elderly population, we're actually doing really, really well. When you look at global cases, numbers that are so large that it's hard to grasp, but when you look at this curve, you can see that nicely it has been decreasing, 37% decrease over the last 2 weeks. And when you look at hotspots around the world, you can see that North America and South America are cooling off, but Europe, Russia, Australia still hotspots. And interestingly, South Korea is starting to rise, which has been really rock stable and controlled during almost the entire pandemic until now. When you look at these countries with case rates compared to the US, you can see that Denmark continues to sort of waffle around much higher than the rest of all these countries. Also, you can see that South Korea line starting to move upwards. Germany perhaps is coming down, but still up above most of these other countries, and everyone else is nicely coming down. Again, remember that both South Africa and Denmark have that BA.2 variant and are showing very different sort of surges. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Nationally, we have a decrease of 67% in the last 14 days. And you can see as far as the hotspot map in the country, there's this interesting collection of West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee that seems to be hot, and kind of a smattering around Florida, Alaska, then the Mountain West and Western states. This is an interesting sort of time lapse where you can see this is where we were in July of 2021. And once I start this, you'll see what happens after that. We go into our Delta surge and we see these cases cropping up and sort of spreading across the country. And then suddenly there's the Omicron surge, and now we're back to this. It gives you some perspective that although we're doing much better than we were a month ago, we're nowhere near that low level that we were at in July of last year. So gives a little bit of context to where we are in the pandemic. So looking at cases in California, you can see that's decreasing rapidly, 69% down over the last 2 weeks. Santa Clara County also coming down nicely, as well as San Mateo County. When you look at Stanford, you can see that unfortunately there has been a little bump in the number of cases in Stanford students, probably mostly due to increased congregation and getting together. But in the faculty, postdocs, and staff, the numbers have continued to come down nicely. When we look at pediatrics, there's a few different interesting figures that have come out recently showing that there has been this definite increase during the Omicron predominant period of hospitalizations in pediatrics, specifically in this age group of 0 to 4 years old. And you can see the numbers overall are still very low, but a definite increase in Omicron, as we've talked about before. Also, which is great news, when you look at this effectiveness of maternal dosing of the vaccine, when you look at infants aged less than 6 months, so just having delivered in the 6 months of life, you can see that having been vaccinated during pregnancy is definitely protective, but especially if you're after 21 weeks gestation, you have a really good 80% vaccine efficacy in infants. When you look at overall pediatric data, we're still hovering in that 20 to 22% sort of case mix that's made up of the pediatric population. Thankfully, still very low hospitalizations and mortality overall. When you look at hospitalizations overall, there's been this good 38% decrease in the last 2 weeks. That lower bar is actually in the ICU, so also coming down. And when you look at in California, finally these numbers are coming down in Santa Clara County as well. It's kind of come off of that plateau we were at 2 weeks ago. And similarly in San Mateo, we are nicely coming down now as well as we are in San Francisco. So all those numbers looking great. When you look at overall mortality nationally, that is finally coming down nationally. When you look at California, there is a continued rise, but again, there's a lag. And so hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll see that turn around as well. In Santa Clara County, similarly, we had 70 deaths over the last 2 weeks, so still a little bit of an increase, but hopefully that will start trending down soon. And then I'll finally leave you with two things that, we focus a lot, again, on hospitalizations and mortality, which are important for us to know and track and make policy based on. But it's also really important to consider the long-term effects of COVID, even mild disease. There's this very interesting survey-based, database based paper that came out looking at the VA population, over 150,000 cases of COVID compared to over 5 million contemporary controls and 5 million historic controls when looking at a whole host of different cardiovascular events. And you could see in this type of database that heart disease risk and all these different types of cardiovascular events really went up quite significantly after COVID-19, even with a mild case, even if you were not hospitalized and did not have cardiac issues during your COVID-19 infection itself. And so certainly something that we should be looking into, and keeping in mind as we message about why vaccination and masking and all of these protocols to keep people from contracting the disease are important, even though hospitalizations, mortality are coming down. And then finally, as I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about which vaccines probably are not going to be the answer, these sort of variant-directed vaccines, what is good is that there are lots of great groups working on a sort of pan-coronavirus vaccine, something that could work against all the different beta coronaviruses. Those make up the family of SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1, the MRSA that has come before, and other coronaviruses that we've been exposed to. And not only could that help bring this pandemic to an end if we come up with something like that, but it could also protect against future pandemics. And so I think this is really the key and where we should focus a lot of time and energy. It will take a lot of science to get to this place, but we have shown that we are capable of doing great things. And I hope that that's going to be something that we see more of, more information about coming soon. So with that, I will stop sharing. And, I don't know if I'm going to need to give you a report in 2 weeks or not. We may be in such a great place by then that you don't need me to update you. And so I'll just keep you posted as needed. And I'll see you when I see you again. Bye.